Today, we're diving into a story that spans centuries. It's a story of trade, ambition, and, well, a whole lot of conflict. We're going to look at how a massive competition for the riches of India didn't just create new trade routes, it actually turned into a high-stakes race for an entire empire.
And that really brings us to the central puzzle, the big question we're going to tackle. How did a private company of merchants, the English East India Company, manage to conquer the vast and powerful Indian subcontinent? I mean, think about that. To figure it out, we've got to go way back to a single event that basically changed the world.
So, picture this. It's 1453. Constantinople, the gateway to the East, falls to the Ottoman Turks. And just like that, for Europeans, access to amazing Indian goods like spices and silks is gone. The old trade routes were slammed shut. This one event lit a fire under every kingdom in Europe. They had to find a new way to India, a direct sea route, to unlock what they saw as just unimaginable wealth. The Age of Discovery wasn't just born out of curiosity, it was born out of pure economic necessity.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll see why India was such a massive prize. Then, we'll follow the Portuguese, the pioneers who first made the journey. We'll watch the Dutch and English jump into the race, which sets up a final, epic showdown between England and France. And then, finally, we'll break down the secrets to England's ultimate victory.
So, what was all the fuss about? Why were people willing to risk literally everything, sailing into the complete unknown? Well, the answer is pretty simple. India was the ultimate prize.
The demand in Europe was just insatiable. I mean, spices like pepper were literally worth their weight in gold. They were crucial for preserving food. Indian textiles, things like calicos and silks, were famous for their quality. And then, of course, you had all the precious stones. If you could find a direct sea route, you could cut out all the middlemen and basically create a monopoly on this incredibly profitable trade.
And the very first nation to answer that call was Portugal. They were really driven by this, and they took a commanding lead in the race to find an ocean route to the east. What's really amazing here is the sheer persistence. In 1487, Bartholomew Diaz managed to get around the southern tip of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope. That proved the route was possible. But it took another whole decade before Vasco da Gama actually finished the job. In May 1498, with the help of a local pilot, he landed at Calicut. And right there, the entire course of Indian history changed forever.
This quote from the first Portuguese governor, Francisco de Almeida, really sums up their entire strategy. It was called the Blue Water Policy. See, their goal wasn't to conquer a bunch of land, at least not at first. Their goal was to completely dominate the sea. They used powerful ships armed with cannons to control the Indian Ocean, and they even forced other traders to buy special permits called cartazes just to be able to sail. This was a huge shift from just trading to actually ruling the waves.
But their dominance didn't last. Internally, their really aggressive religious policies, like starting the Inquisition in Goa, created a lot of resentment. That, plus a pretty nasty reputation for piracy, made them lose favor with the Mughal court. And then on top of all that, they had to deal with powerful Indian rivals like the Marathas. So with all this internal rot and external pressure, plus the discovery of Brazil pulling their attention away, they were left wide open just as new, tougher competitors started to show up.
And that power vacuum left by the Portuguese? Well, it was basically an open invitation. The Dutch and the English arrived, having learned from the Portuguese, and they brought their own big ambitions. The race for India was about to get a whole lot more crowded.
And this is where things get really interesting, because the Dutch and the English had totally different game plans at first. The Dutch were laser-focused on one thing, monopolizing the super lucrative spice trade. Their main interest was actually in the Spice Islands, what we now call Indonesia. India was more of a stop along the way. The English, on the other hand, well, they decided to double down on India itself. They methodically worked to build a commercial foundation, getting trading posts and privileges that would, become the bedrock of their future power.
Oh, and we should give a quick mention to the Danes. They showed up in 1616 and set up a few settlements, but they never really became major commercial players. They were actually better known for their missionary work. Eventually, they just sold their factories to the British and bowed out of the race. So, with the Portuguese fading and the Dutch focused elsewhere, the stage was set for the final act. This was a head-to-head battle between the two remaining heavyweights, England and France. And this wasn't just about trade anymore. This was for total supremacy in India. The French were kind of late to the party, forming their East India Company in 1664. But even though they were late, they were a serious force. They set up their headquarters in Pondicherry, which became a direct rival to the English hub in Madras.
This whole rivalry came to a head in what we call the Carnatic Wars. At first, it was a proxy war. The English and French would back rival Indian princes, basically just continuing their European squabbles on Indian soil. But it very quickly turned into a direct fight for who would control the politics and trade of southern India. In the end, after decades of fighting, the English, led by guys like Robert Clive, completely crushed the French and shattered their dreams of an Indian empire.
So, this brings us right back to our big question. The French were beaten, the other Europeans were pushed to the sidelines. How in the world did the English East India Company pull it off? Okay, let's break down the key reasons for their success.
It wasn't just one magic bullet, right? It was this powerful combination of different advantages that all worked together. We're going to see how the very structure of their company gave them a huge edge, how their power at sea was their lifeline, and how things like military discipline, political stability, and an industrial revolution back home created the perfect storm for victory.
Now this is a huge one. You have to look at how these two companies were built. The French company was basically an arm of the government. It was slow, bureaucratic, and its funding could get cut off whenever the French king was busy with the war in Europe. The English company, though, was a private business. It was nimble, it was well funded by private investors, and it was driven by one thing: profit. That made it way more efficient and motivated.
And then you have what might just be their ultimate trump card, the Royal Navy. English naval superiority was everything. It meant they could reliably get soldiers, money, and supplies from England to India. But even more importantly, it meant they could block French ports and cut off their rivals' supply lines. When you're fighting a war thousands of miles from home, controlling the sea is absolutely critical.
And these advantages just kept piling on top of each other. The English military was incredibly disciplined, and crucially, the soldiers got paid on time, which ensured their loyalty. Back in Britain, a stable government meant consistent political and financial support for the company. And to top it all off, the Industrial Revolution was just kicking off, giving Britain an economic and technological power that its rivals just couldn't compete with.
So, when you put it all together, by outmaneuvering every single European rival with this mix of business smarts, naval power, and military might, the East India Company won the race. And here's the key point. It wasn't just a company of merchants anymore. It was on the verge of becoming the actual ruler of India.
And that was the incredible shift that took place. A competition that started over trade ended in conquest, completely reshaping the destiny of a subcontinent. A private company had won the race for an empire. But that victory marked the beginning of a new, incredibly complex, and often painful colonial era for India. Which leaves us with one final big question to think about. At what cost?